Hi guys, in this video I want to make a little response video to when Sean McDowell had Drew, aka Genetically Modified Skeptic, on his YouTube channel. There's a couple of takeaways I want to present here that I think will be good to take into consideration between dialogues of atheists and Christians. First thing I want to say is that both were very respectful to each other. They didn't throw ad homs at each other. They didn't disrespect each other overtly or anything like that. And there was generally a pleasant vibe, a heartfelt vibe, I would say, in this discussion. Now, Sean had Drew on his channel in order to sort of have Drew, the atheist, share his testimony, I guess you could say, an atheist testimony, if there is such a thing, about what it was like for him growing up, what it was like for him leaving Christianity, and some pitfalls and some things to learn from that happened to Drew in relation to other Christians around him. So Drew basically gave his story in how he went from Christianity to atheism, and I think there's some good insights here on how not to be a Christian. So the first thing I think is the most striking thing that popped out to me was that Drew was raised in a very strict, legalistic environment when he was growing up. He was in an independent Baptist church, and I know what that's like because I went to school from K to 5 in a very, very strict Baptist school. So I know a little bit about that world. Drew says that Jesus was everything for these people and that personal relationship with Christ was the actual pinnacle thing that you could aspire to do or be in this environment. I think some of the best advice that I got from this, although I'll have something else, a little caveat to this later, but the main gist of what I got from this in terms of advice between atheists and Christians is that we really have to be more loving people. Drew said there was only one explicitly positive experience that he had with Christians after he told them that he was an atheist. And ironically enough, it was just this person validating that he's valuable as a human being, which I think should be a core thing about all humans, and that Christians should really exemplify this of treating other people as though they're valuable, disregarding anything else. One thing that comes to mind is, as Drew said it, is that doubt was not welcomed in this environment that he grew up in. If you doubted, it could cost you dearly for merely doubting in the Christian faith. And Sean McDowell has said on numerous occasions that doubts are not wrong. Doubts are not a sin. And Sean will allude to people like Thomas in the Bible, who actually wanted evidence for believing that Jesus rose from the dead by saying, I want to put my hands in his side and my hands in his palms. And of course, Jesus gives him the evidence that he wants because he's his disciple, because he's an apostle. So some things about Sean before I move on is that Sean was very pleasant and empathetic. You could tell. You could even see it on his face. I don't know if anyone else noticed this, but I got the impression that Sean was really biting his tongue sometimes when he wanted to ask a question. It's just little things like piping up and then quietly listening after piping up and just wanting to listen to Drew until Drew was done talking about what he wanted to say. And as always, Sean asked really, really good questions. He always asks these good questions. He knows what questions to ask. And surprisingly enough, most of the guests that he has on usually answer his actual questions. They don't go off on, a tangent of, talking about something completely unrelated. I don't know if this is due to them having a prior conversation about what questions were going to be asked or not, but I know that generally speaking, Sean asked good questions and people answer his questions. So if you really want to know how to do this sort of thing where you have people on your YouTube channel, I really recommend that you watch Sean in his discourse with other people on his channel. He always is non-judgmental, not like judgmental is a worst sin in the world, but he's not judgmental towards them. He just asks open-ended questions. He doesn't really very often ask specific yes or no questions. Sometimes he does, but most of the time he asks open-ended questions where he just lets the guests talk about what they have to say. So we can really take a cue here from Sean McDowell in how to discuss matters of different worldview with other people. Now I want to get into what I call the moral of the story, or the moral of the interview, however you want to phrase that. The moniker that I would kind of like to use for this is something like, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. Kind of. Drew said he knew that his parents would unconditionally love him no matter what. The only caveat to this is that he probably thinks that they were brainwashed. He says his family goes back like 2 or 3 generations of being missionaries before Drew was born. So that goes to show that they really tried to exemplify this whole relationship with Jesus thing that was so prevalent in the culture, even so far as to say, I'm going to sacrifice my life to spreading the gospel with other people. I say that Drew probably thinks that his family was brainwashed just based on little things about how he talks about the surrounding culture at large there, and that there's this impediment of judgment on you if you doubt. And though he might not have explicitly felt that from his family members, it was still present in the culture, so that's going to affect his parents, of course, because they're the ones deciding what culture to be in some sense. So the biggest takeaway here is this: no amount of love or evidence can change someone's mind. It requires a changed heart by the Holy Spirit. Now, Drew might contest with me at this point about whether or not he was actually saved. And of course, he wouldn't frame it in that framework to say he was saved or not. He would say, of course, that he was a Christian, because once you're an atheist, of course, you don't believe in salvation. But he would say he was totally a Christian. The only thing that I would say here is that I don't think he had the experience that I talk about in my previous video, where I talk about what does salvation look like. I don't think he had that experience. Now, I could be wrong about that. I could be misinterpreting Drew's answer to Sean in what he said, and what Sean asked him about being a Christian and how did you become a Christian sort of thing. So yeah, that's really all I have to say. Thanks for watching, guys. Talk to you later. Bye.